He thought she was just a woman stranded in the rain. He was wrong. The night Ryan Walker pulled over on that empty stretch of highway outside Portland, he wasn't looking for anything. He was just a tired 32-year-old single father trying to get home to his daughter. But the woman standing next to that broken-down luxury car, calm, soaked to the skin, and refusing to show a single crack of distress, was about to change every quiet, carefully managed corner of his life. She told him her name was Victoria Reed. She did not tell him she was worth $400 million. And by the time Ryan learned the truth, he would already be standing in front of hundreds of people at the most important charity gala of the year, being publicly destroyed by a lie he never saw coming. If you've ever been judged for something you didn't do, drop your city in the comments below. Let me know how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button, follow along, and stay until the very end. Because the moment that matters most isn't the betrayal. It's what happens after. Part 1. The rain came down hard that Tuesday evening, the kind of Pacific Northwest downpour that turned headlights into blurred halos and made every road outside Portland feel like the edge of the world. Ryan Walker had the heat cranked up in his 12-year-old Subaru, Emma's half-finished juice box sitting in the cup holder beside him, a sticky reminder that he'd picked her up from school 3 hours ago and had promptly left it behind when she ran inside the house. He'd meant to go straight home after the client meeting. The meeting had run long. The client, a mid-sized furniture company out of Beaverton, had spent 40 minutes interrogating his logo mock-ups before deciding they wanted to go back to something classic, which was a polite way of saying they'd wasted his afternoon and hadn't decided anything. Ryan wasn't angry about it. He was past anger with difficult clients. He was at the stage of exhaustion where you just absorb the disappointment and keep moving, the same way you learn to walk through bad weather. Head down, keep going, don't think too hard about the cold. He was thinking about dinner. Emma had asked for pasta that morning with the particular authority of a 7-year-old who had considered the matter fully and arrived at a conclusion that was not up for debate. He was mentally running through whether he had enough garlic when his headlights swept across something on the shoulder of Route 217. A car. A very expensive car. Even through the rain and the dark, he could tell it was something foreign and well-made, low to the ground, silver, the kind of vehicle that cost more than his yearly income by a comfortable margin. The hood was up. The hazard lights blinked orange against the wet pavement, and standing beside it, arms folded across her chest, was a woman. Ryan slowed down without quite deciding to. He wasn't the type to stop for strangers. He wasn't suspicious by nature, but he was practical. He had Emma at home, he had a schedule, and he had learned from years of operating alone that he didn't have unlimited reserves of time or energy to spend on situations that weren't his responsibility. But there was something about the way the woman was standing there that made him break. She wasn't waving, she wasn't panicked. She was just standing in the rain beside a broken car with the contained, slightly furious stillness of someone who had assessed their situation and was deeply, privately unhappy about it. He pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her and sat for a second with his hands on the wheel. "Don't be stupid," one part of his brain said. "Don't be the person who drives past someone in the rain," said another. He got out of the car. The rain hit him immediately, plastering his jacket to his shoulders. He jogged back toward the silver car, squinting against the wet. Up close, the woman was younger than he'd expected. Maybe late 20s, early 30s, with dark hair pushed back from her face and rain running freely down her cheekbones. She was wearing what appeared to be a very good coat. It was completely soaked. "Hey," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Car trouble?" She looked at him. Her eyes were dark and level, the kind of look that had probably made a lot of people feel like they needed to explain themselves. "Something under the hood," she said. "I don't know exactly what. It just stopped." Her voice was steady. No tremor, no plea for help, just a flat statement of fact. Ryan appreciated that, in a distant way. "Did you call anyone?" A brief pause. "My assistant isn't answering. Roadside service has a 2-hour wait." "Okay." He glanced at the car. "You mind if I look?" She stared at him for a moment. "You know cars?" "A little. I had a phase." That was underselling it somewhat. The phase had been his mid-20s, right after his divorce when he'd needed something that he could fix with his hands. Something with a clear problem and a clear solution. He'd spent 18 months rebuilding a '94 Bronco in his brother's garage. The Bronco was long gone, sold when Emma was born, and he needed the money, but the knowledge had stayed. "Be my guest," she said, and stepped back. He went around to the front of the car. The hood was already propped. He leaned over the engine and pulled out his phone to use as a flashlight, aware of the rain soaking through his jacket, water dripping off his nose. It took him about 2 minutes to find it. A loose connection to the fuel pump relay, probably jostled loose on rough pavement. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it was enough to get the car running again. He straightened up. "Try it now." She got in without another word. The engine turned over immediately. Ryan closed the hood and stepped back, wiping rain off his face with his sleeve. She got back out of the car. "How did you do that?" she asked. "Loose connection." He shrugged. "It'll hold for a while, but you should have someone look at it properly. Might be the relay itself." She was quiet for a moment, studying him with that same level expression. "What do you want for that?" He blinked. "What?" "For fixing it. What do you want?" It wasn't a question exactly, more like a negotiation waiting to happen. Ryan got the impression that most things in this woman's life were negotiations. "Nothing," he said. "It took 3 minutes." "You're soaked." "I was already soaked from walking to the car." He started to turn. "Drive safe. Get that relay looked at." "Wait." He stopped. She reached into her coat pocket and produced a business card, then seemed to think better of it and put it away again. A small hesitation, the first one he'd seen from her. "I'm Victoria," she said instead. "Victoria Reed." He turned back around. Ryan Walker. They were both standing in the rain. It was, objectively, a ridiculous situation. "The relay," she said. "You said I should have someone look at it. Do you do that? Mechanic work?" "No, I'm a graphic designer." Something shifted in her expression. The faintest recalibration, like she'd been expecting a different answer and was adjusting accordingly. "But you know cars." "I used to. It's a side thing." He glanced back at his Subaru, headlights still on, rain sheeting down the windshield. "I've really got to get home. I have a kid." "Of course." She stepped back. "Thank you, Ryan Walker." "No problem." He walked back to his car. He drove home thinking about garlic and pasta and whether Emma had done her reading homework, and he thought about the woman in the rain for maybe 30 seconds total before he filed her away in the same mental drawer as all the unremarkable Tuesday evenings. He didn't expect to see her again. He had a system with Emma, not a rigid one. He'd tried rigid once in the early months after Diane left, and it had made both of them miserable. But a loose architecture that kept the days from sliding into chaos. School pickup by 3:30, homework at the kitchen table while he answered emails, dinner by 6, bath by 8, books until 8:30. Emma had inherited his stubbornness about routines, which meant she enforced them more strictly than he did, and she let him know about it with the full authority of a 7-year-old who had opinions. "You're late," she said when he walked in, not looking up from the picture she was drawing. She was lying on her stomach on the living room floor, crayons spread around her in a semicircle. 6 minutes. 7. He hung up his soaked jacket on the hook by the door. "I helped someone with their car." "In the rain?" "In the rain." She finally looked up. Emma had his dark eyes and Diane's nose, and a particular expression when she was reserving judgment that was entirely her own. "Did you get sick?" "I haven't had time to get sick yet." "You're going to get sick." "Thank you for that. What do you want for dinner?" "Pasta." She said it with the certainty of someone who had announced this hours ago and saw no reason to repeat herself. "I know. With what?" "Butter and cheese." "That's not a balanced meal." "You asked what I wanted." He pointed at her. "You're 7. Almost 8. He went to the kitchen and started water for pasta, and Emma followed him in and climbed onto the counter stool she'd been using as a perch since she was 4, the one with the slightly wobbly leg that he kept meaning to fix. She resumed drawing on a fresh piece of paper, narrating the picture to herself in a low murmur. This was the part of the day Ryan loved most and never said out loud. The kitchen filling up with steam and the smell of butter, Emma narrating her drawings, the ordinary texture of a weekday evening that was his, entirely his, something no one could take. It was small and imperfect and real. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. "Is this Ryan Walker?" A woman's voice, controlled, efficient. "Yeah." "This is Victoria Reed. You helped me tonight on Route 217. He was briefly surprised. He hadn't given her his number. Then again, she had his name. He supposed if you wanted to find someone and you had resources, a name was enough. "How'd you get this number?" "I asked my assistant to look you up. Your design business has a contact page." A pause. "I'm not trying to alarm you. I wanted to thank you properly. It was not a situation I handled well." Ryan leaned against the counter. Emma was watching him with wide eyes, cartoonishly curious. He turned away. "You handled it fine." "I was standing in the rain without a functional plan." "You had a roadside service called. That's a plan." "A bad one." Another pause. "I'd like to buy you dinner. To say thank you." "You really don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." Something in her voice, a slight edge, like she was unaccustomed to offers being declined, but also something underneath that, something more genuine. "I want to, if you're willing." Ryan turned to look at Emma, who had stopped pretending to draw and was now openly staring at him with her chin propped in both hands. "I've got a kid," he said. "My schedule's not very flexible." "I'm aware you have a schedule. I'm a flexible person." He could hear a faint note of dry humor there. "Friday evening, 6:30? There's a place called Hartley's on Morrison. I'll make the reservation." He thought about saying no. He wasn't sure why he didn't. Maybe it was the day he'd had. The client who wanted something classic, the rain, the late dinner, the 7 minutes. Maybe it was something about her voice, the way she said, "I'm a flexible person," like it cost her something to admit it. "Okay," he said. "Friday." "Good." A brief pause. "Thank you again, Ryan Walker." She hung up. Emma stared at him. "Who was that?" "A woman whose car I fixed." "Is she nice?" "I don't know yet." Emma considered this. "Is she pretty?" "Emma?" "I'm asking." "Go finish your picture." She went, grinning to herself, and Ryan stood in his kitchen with the water boiling behind him and looked at his phone for a moment before he put it in his pocket and went back to making pasta. Puet. Hartley's was the kind of restaurant Ryan didn't go to. Not because he couldn't appreciate a good meal, but because the places he liked didn't have hostesses and mood lighting and menus without prices. He'd looked the place up online on Wednesday evening after Emma was asleep, and he'd stared at the photos of the dark wood interior and the white tablecloth tables for a while before closing the browser and going to bed. He wore the jacket he kept for client presentations. It was a good jacket, charcoal, slim fit, the one thing in his closet that made him look like someone who had his life together. He was 10 minutes early and stood on the sidewalk outside for 5 minutes before going in. Victoria was already there. She looked different than she had in the rain. Of course she did. She was dry, for one thing, but it was more than that. She was composed in a way that felt deliberate, like composure was something she'd constructed and maintained rather than something that came naturally. She was wearing a dark blouse, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back. She looked at him from the table as he came through the door, and for a second her expression did something he couldn't quite read before it settled back into that same level steadiness. "You made it," she said. "I said I would." He sat down across from her. "You're already here." "I was early." "So was I, but I stood outside." Something flickered in her expression. Not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. "Why?" "I don't know. Seemed like the thing to do." He looked around the restaurant. "This place is a little much." "I know. I'm sorry. I have a default setting." She said it without particular inflection, matter of fact. "I can go somewhere else next time if you'd rather." "Next time," he said, not making it a question. She met his eyes, if there is one. The waiter came. Ryan ordered something from the middle of the menu that he didn't recognize but sounded reasonable. Victoria ordered efficiently, barely glancing at the menu, the way people do when they've eaten in restaurants like this their whole lives, and the novelty has long since passed. "So," he said when the waiter left, "what do you do?" A fractional hesitation. So small he almost missed it. Business consulting, she said. Corporate restructuring. That's vague. Most of what I do is vague, by necessity. He looked at her steadily. Is it a confidentiality thing? Partially. She folded her hands on the table, so a precise, composed gesture. And partially, I'm not sure what to say when someone asks that question in a restaurant. A pause. What about you? Graphic design? Yeah, small operation. I do brand work mostly, logos, visual identity, some web layout, small to mid-size companies. Do you like it? Most of the time. He thought about it. I like the problem-solving part, client meetings less so. What happened with the client meeting Tuesday? He raised an eyebrow. How do you know I had one? You said you were on your way home from a meeting. He didn't remember saying that. Good memory. Occupational habit. She watched him. So what happened? He told her about the furniture company, the 40 minutes, the eventual retreat to something classic. He kept it dry, factual, the way he told most stories. But at one point he did an impression of the client, a heavy-set man named Dave who kept touching his chin and saying, "I'm just not feeling it." And Victoria laughed. It surprised him, not that she laughed, but the quality of it, unguarded, slightly reluctant, like she hadn't meant to, like it had escaped before she could decide whether to let it out. Sorry, she said, pressing her lips together. Don't apologize. It was accurate. He watched her. You don't laugh much. I do. A beat. In the right company. He didn't know what to do with that. He looked at his water glass. Tell me about your daughter, she said. Emma? You mentioned her twice Tuesday night. Once when we met, once when you answered the phone. In roughly 3 minutes of conversation, you mentioned her twice. He considered. That's probably accurate. How old? 7? Almost 8. She'd correct me if she were here. She's very precise. Like you. I hope not. I'm not precise. I'm just organized by necessity. He thought for a second. She was born precise. She came out of the hospital and immediately started having opinions about how things should be done. Victoria's expression softened, just slightly. What does she look like? Like herself. He knew that wasn't an answer. Dark eyes. She's got this look she does when she thinks you're being stupid. She doesn't say anything, she just looks at you with this very patient expression, and you know. What does she want to be when she grows up? Currently, a marine biologist. Last month it was an architect. Before that, it was a professional dog trainer. He paused. She's evolving. Victoria smiled at that. Smaller, quieter than the laugh, but real. They talked through dinner, and Ryan noticed somewhere around the main course that the conversation had moved from the careful, exploratory territory of two strangers and into something a little more ordinary. She asked good questions, and she listened when he answered, which was rarer than it should have been. She didn't talk much about herself, deflecting smoothly when he asked. It's complicated, or it depends on who you ask. But it didn't feel like evasion so much as genuine discomfort with the subject. He didn't push. He had his own things he didn't discuss on a first meeting. When the check came, she reached for it without hesitation. I said dinner was on me, she said. I can split it. I know you can. She looked at him. Let me do the thing I offered to do. He let her. He didn't love it, but he let her. They stood on the sidewalk outside Hartley's in the cold November air, and she pulled her coat tighter and looked at him with that composed, assessing expression. This was good, she said. It was. Would you be open to doing this again? Something less formal. What, like a dive bar? If you want. He looked at her. She was hard to read, and he was usually decent at reading people. There were things under the surface that he couldn't get traction on. Not dishonesty exactly, but a deliberate distance, a space between the person she was presenting and some other person who lived a little further back. He told himself that wasn't his problem. He told himself it was just dinner. Sure, he said. Less formal. The less formal meeting happened the following Wednesday at a place called The Anchor on the east side. Genuinely good cheeseburgers, loud on weekends, quieter midweek. Ryan picked it because he liked it, and because he wanted to see how she'd respond to something that wasn't Hartley's. She responded fine. She ordered a burger and ate it like a person and didn't make any comment about the venue. She'd worn jeans, which he noticed because they were different from the composed professional presentation of Friday night. She still had that quality of self-containment, that sense that she was deciding how much of herself to deploy at any given moment. But there was something slightly easier about her in this room, at this table, over a burger and a beer. They'd been talking for 20 minutes when his phone lit up. He glanced at it reflexively, a habit from the years when his sister babysat Emma, and he needed to be reachable. The contact said Mrs. Guerrero, Emma's second-grade teacher. "Sorry," he said, grabbing it. "Give me 1 second." Victoria nodded, watching him without comment. "Hello?" He stood up slightly, turned half away. "Mr. Walker, it's Patricia Guerrero. I'm so sorry to call this late. It's not an emergency. Emma's fine, but I wanted to let you know she had a difficult afternoon. She had a conflict with another student at recess, and she's been very upset about it. She handled it well. I just wanted you to be aware." He pressed his hand to the back of his neck. "Can I ask what happened?" Mrs. Guerrero explained briefly. Another girl had told Emma that kids who didn't have moms were different, and Emma had responded, in Mrs. Guerrero's careful phrasing, very directly. Emma was fine. The situation was handled. She'd be herself tomorrow. Ryan thanked her and hung up. He sat back down. Victoria was watching him. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah, my daughter had a rough afternoon." He rubbed his face with one hand. A kid at school said something to her about not having a mom. A silence fell. Not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted. "How long has she not had one?" Victoria asked. Not prying, careful. "Her mom left when she was 4. She's in Chicago now. They talk on the phone maybe once a month." He said it without particular emotion because he'd had 3 years to learn how to say it without particular emotion. Emma's adjusted. She's really okay most of the time, but sometimes it lands wrong. Victoria nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. "I think kids know when they're okay," she said finally, "even if other people keep acting like they should be less okay than they are." He looked at her. "Personal experience?" A brief pause. "Something like that." He didn't ask. She didn't offer. They finished their burgers, and after a while the conversation drifted back to easier things. His current client work, a brand identity project for a small Portland bakery, whether she had preferences about the design of things. She did. She had very specific preferences, articulated precisely, and he found himself engaged by it in a way that surprised him. This sharpness she had, this confidence in her own taste. Outside, saying goodbye on the sidewalk, she said, "Emma?" He turned. "What?" "She sounds like someone worth knowing." She said it plainly, without decoration. Ryan didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He wasn't in the habit of people wanting to know Emma. Most of the people he dated, briefly and unsuccessfully, in the years since Diane, had treated his daughter as a complicating factor, something to be managed. Not Victoria. She'd said worth knowing like it was the natural thing, like wanting to meet the daughter was self-evident. "She'd like you," he said. "She has high standards, but she'd like you." Victoria almost smiled. Good standards to have. He drove home thinking that the woman was hiding something. It was a practical observation, not a fearful one. She was evasive about her work, precise about almost everything else. And she looked at him sometimes with a calculation that felt like she was measuring the distance between what she wanted to tell him and what she'd decided not to. He'd been lied to before, in ways that had cost him a significant amount. He'd learned to notice, but whatever she was hiding, it didn't feel like cruelty. It felt more like fear or caution, or something she was waiting to be sure about before she said it out loud. He'd been that person once. He understood that particular kind of silence. At the third meeting, she met Emma. Ryan hadn't planned it. He'd asked Victoria if she wanted to meet for coffee that Saturday morning, and Emma had overheard the conversation. She had a preternatural ability to overhear things, and had stated, without preamble, that she wanted to come. Ryan had started to say no, but Emma had said, "Dad, I've been curious about her for 2 weeks," with a gravity that was difficult to argue with. They met at a coffee place near the park, small and crowded on Saturday morning, and Emma walked in ahead of Ryan with the confidence of someone who had been imagining this meeting and was prepared for it. Victoria was at a corner table, and she looked up, and her expression did something complicated when she saw Emma. A split second of something raw before the composure clicked back into place. Emma stopped in front of her and said, "You're Victoria." "I am," Victoria said. "And you're Emma. How do you know my name?" "Your dad talks about you." Emma considered this. "What does he say?" "That you have opinions about dinner and you're almost 8. Emma looked at Ryan. "That's accurate." She sat down next to Victoria without any further preamble, and within 6 minutes she was explaining the difference between bony fish and cartilaginous fish with the authority of someone who had researched the topic extensively. Victoria listened with complete attention, asking questions that were genuinely good questions. Not the indulgent kind that adults ask children, but real follow-up questions. The kind that told Emma she was being taken seriously. Ryan sat across from them and drank his coffee and watched. He'd never seen Emma warm to someone so quickly. She was, as he'd said, precise in her evaluations. She had decided within the first grade that there was a specific category of adult who talked to kids correctly and a much larger category of adults who did it incorrectly, and she was very clear about which was which. Victoria was, apparently, in the first category. They stayed at the coffee place for an hour and 40 minutes. At the end, Emma asked Victoria if she would like to see her drawings sometime, and Victoria said she would, and Emma said okay in the tone of someone who had arrived at an important decision. Walking to the car, Emma said quietly, "I like her." "Yeah?" "She treats me like a person." She climbed into the back seat. "Some grown-ups don't do that." He buckled her in. "I know, bud." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Are you going to keep seeing her?" He started the car. "I don't know." "I think you should," Emma said, and turned to look out the window with the serene finality of someone who had weighed the evidence and reached a verdict. No. The weeks that followed had a shape to them. They fell into irregular meetings. Dinner when he could find a sitter, coffee on weekday mornings, once an awkward video call when she was apparently traveling that she'd initiated without much explanation, and he'd answered from his kitchen at 7 p.m. while Emma was in the bath. She looked different on a screen, slightly more tired, the composed precision slightly more effortful, and he noticed that she was careful about her background. She'd angled herself so he couldn't see much of wherever she was. He noticed things, without pressing. He noticed that she always paid, always, no matter how casually he moved toward the bill. Not assertively, but with a particular kind of fluency, like it was simply the way things worked in her world. He noticed that her phone was always face down on the table, and that it buzzed constantly, and that she ignored it with the discipline of someone who had been ignoring demanding phones for a long time. He noticed that she had never in 5 meetings said a specific thing about where she worked or what she did, consulting and restructuring, and it depends on who you ask. He liked her. That was the uncomfortable truth underneath the noticing. He liked her in a way he hadn't liked someone in years, not the tentative, cautious affection of the dates he'd gone on since Diane, the ones that had never quite gotten traction, but something specific to her, to the way she listened, and the dry precision of her humor and the look on her face when Emma had explained sharks. He liked her, and he didn't entirely know who she was, and those two things sat uncomfortably alongside each other. He didn't bring it up. He wasn't sure how to bring it up without sounding like he was making demands. And he wasn't a person who made demands. He waited, and he noticed, and he kept meeting her. He was working late one Thursday, a brand package for the bakery, deadline Friday, when his phone lit up with a text from Marcus Webb, his college friend who currently worked at a design agency downtown and kept his finger on the pulse of things Ryan mostly ignored. "Hey, random question. Do you know someone named Victoria Reed?" Ryan looked at the message for a moment. Typed back, "Why?" The response came quickly. "Because I just saw a photo of you two at the Anchor on my phone, and it's saying she's some big deal CEO. Reed Capital, the restructuring firm. She's like the 4th richest self-made woman under 35 in the country or some insane thing. I just want to make sure you know who you're dating." Ryan read the message twice. Then he put his phone down and stared at his monitor without seeing it. He picked up the phone again, typed, "Can you send me the photo?" Marcus sent it. A grainy, candid shot that looked like it had been taken from across the restaurant. The two of them at a table, clearly mid-conversation. Underneath it, in the caption on whatever entertainment news site it had come from, Victoria Reed, CEO of Reed Capital, spotted dining with unidentified companion in Portland, Oregon. He Googled Reed Capital. It took about 30 seconds to understand what he was looking at. Victoria Reed had founded Reed Capital at 26. It was now, 4 years later, one of the most aggressive and successful private equity and corporate restructuring firms in the Pacific Northwest, with holdings across multiple industries and a portfolio valued at north of $400 million. There was a photo on the company website, a headshot, very professional, very composed, and it was unmistakably her. Same dark eyes, same precise, contained expression. He sat with it for a while. He thought about consulting. He thought about it depends on who you ask. He thought about the phone always face down and the constantly buzzing messages and the way she never said a concrete thing about her own life and the fluency with which she paid the check every time without a moment's discomfort. He wasn't angry exactly. He didn't have the energy for anger. He was tired, and he was sitting in his home office at 11 p.m., and the woman he'd been having dinner with for the past several weeks had been consistently, deliberately, inexplicably less than honest with him about who she was. He turned back to the bakery project. He finished the brand package around midnight. He sent it to the client. He sat for another few minutes in the quiet house, Emma long asleep, the rain that had started around 9 still going outside. The same rain that had started everything. He picked up his phone, stared at Victoria's number, put the phone down. He'd learned something from Diane's leaving. There were questions you could ask and questions that asked themselves. Some things you just had to wait on, let them come to you in the right shape at the right time, because if you forced them before they were ready, you'd get an answer that didn't mean anything. He went to bed. He didn't sleep particularly well, but he didn't call. He didn't bring it up the next time he saw her. That was a deliberate choice, not a passive one. Ryan had spent Thursday night and most of Friday morning turning the question over, examining it from different angles the way he'd examine a client brief that wasn't working. Not emotionally, just practically, trying to understand what the actual problem was before he decided how to respond to it. The actual problem was not that she was wealthy. He didn't care about that. Or at least, he didn't care in the way that might have made someone else feel threatened or destabilized. What bothered him was simpler and more stubborn. She had made a choice, consistently and repeatedly, to present a false version of herself. Not through lies, exactly. She hadn't said anything that was technically untrue, but through omission so careful it amounted to the same thing. He'd been on the receiving end of dishonesty before, from someone he'd trusted entirely, and it had cost him a marriage and 2 years of rebuilding from a very low point. He wasn't carrying that around as an open wound anymore, but it had left him with a particular sensitivity to the gap between what people said and what they were actually doing. He wanted to understand why before he decided what to do. So when Victoria texted Saturday afternoon asking if he was free Sunday, coffee, if you want, Emma can come, he said yes. He picked up Emma from a birthday party at 4:30, drove home through the early dark of a November afternoon, and didn't tell Emma what he'd found out about Victoria, because there was nothing to tell yet. He didn't have the shape of it. He needed to get the shape of it first. Sunday morning, they met at a different coffee place, one Emma picked because they had a specific type of chocolate croissant she'd decided was essential. Victoria was already there when they arrived, and Emma went directly to her and presented her with a drawing she'd apparently made specifically for this meeting. A labeled diagram of a whale shark with 14 annotated body parts, produced on the back of a school worksheet. Victoria studied it with genuine attention. "This is extremely detailed," she said. "I researched it," Emma said. "The ampullae of Lorenzini," Victoria said, pointing. "I know what those are." Emma's eyes went wide. "How?" "I read a lot." Victoria looked at Ryan over Emma's head. Something in her expression, a warmth, and underneath it something careful, like she knew they were approaching something and was bracing for it. Ryan poured sugar into his coffee and said nothing. The morning went the way mornings with Emma went. Emma led the conversation with total authority. Victoria followed it with the same complete attentiveness he'd noticed before, and Ryan sat slightly to the side of it and watched. Emma had that effect on people when they let her. She pulled the pretense out of a room by simply not engaging with it. She didn't know how to perform interest. She was just interested, or she wasn't. And if she was, you felt it, and it made you feel like you had to meet her at that level. Victoria met her at that level every time. That was the thing that kept catching Ryan off center. Whatever she was hiding from him, she wasn't performing anything with Emma. That was real. When Emma was in the bathroom, a longer expedition than strictly necessary, because Emma was easily distracted by anything she found interesting, including the decorative tiles in this particular establishment, Victoria set down her cup and looked at him directly. "Something's different," she said. He met her eyes. "Is it?" "Yes." She waited. "You've been quiet." "I'm usually quiet." "Differently quiet." She folded her hands around her mug. That composed gesture, the one he'd noticed the first night at Hartley's, the one she did when she was making herself hold still. "Did something happen?" He looked at her for a moment. He thought about continuing to wait, letting her come to it in her own time. Then he decided, quietly and without drama, that he'd already waited long enough. "I looked you up," he said. The silence that followed lasted about 3 seconds. He watched her face, the slight stillness, the careful recalibration. Not panic, not anger, something that looked more like relief with a layer of dread underneath it. "Okay," she said. "Reed Capital." He kept his voice even. "About 400 million in holdings. Youngest female CEO in Pacific Northwest private equity, depending on the year." "Approximately correct." "Victoria." He set down his own cup. "You told me you did consulting." "I do." A pause. "Among other things." "That's not—" He stopped, took a breath. "That's not the same thing." She looked at him steadily, and for the first time since he'd known her, the composure wasn't quite holding. There was something underneath it working against it, something she was pressing down with visible effort. "No," she said, "it's not." He waited. She was quiet for a moment, then, "I didn't know how to tell you. Early on, it seemed like too much, too fast. I didn't know you, and it changes everything. When people know, the way they talk to me changes, the way they act, the questions they ask." A pause. "And then I kept seeing you, and it kept being not like that. And then I couldn't figure out how to say it without it sounding like I deliberately deceived you." "Because you did." Her jaw tightened. "I know." Not maliciously. He said it plainly, because he believed it, and because precision mattered. "I don't think you're a malicious person, but you made a choice, every time we met, to tell me something incomplete." "Yes." She held his gaze. "I did." The bathroom door opened, and Emma came back, distracted, telling them something she'd found on the back of the paper towel dispenser that she considered noteworthy. Ryan listened to Emma. Victoria listened to Emma. The moment closed around the conversation like water over a stone, and they let it close, because Emma was there and Emma came first. But walking to the parking lot afterward, after Emma had run ahead to the car and was pressing her face against the window of a pet supply store next door, Victoria stopped on the sidewalk and said, "Are we done?" Ryan stopped. "I don't know." She waited. It was the same quality of waiting she had with Emma. Complete attention, no press, just there. "I need you to not do that again," he said finally. "I don't care about the money. I genuinely don't care about that, but I need you to stop deciding what I'm allowed to know about you." "Okay." "That's not—" He exhaled. "I mean, I need it to actually stop. Not just a yes. I know what you mean." She looked at him, and the composure had dropped another notch, enough that he could see underneath it now. The fatigue of someone who had been managing information and managing people and managing herself for a very long time, and who was tired of it in a way she hadn't admitted to. "I'm not good at this, at letting someone in. I know that about myself. I've been told that about myself more than once. I'm not asking you to be good at it immediately. I'm asking you to try." A long pause. "That I can do," she said. And then quietly, I'm sorry, Ryan. He nodded once, looked at Emma, who had moved on from the pet store and was now apparently evaluating the contents of a hardware store window with great interest. Come on, he said. She's going to spend 20 minutes telling us about drill bits. Victoria made a sound that was almost a laugh, and they walked to where Emma was waiting. She tried. It wasn't a sudden transformation. Ryan hadn't expected one and wouldn't have trusted it if it came. But gradually, over the following weeks, the omissions became less frequent and the deflections became less smooth, like a machine that had been running on a particular program for years and was learning, imperfectly, to run a different one. She told him about Reed Capital, not the full corporate biography, but the actual story, the version she didn't tell journalists. She'd started it at 26 with a small inheritance from her grandfather and a business plan she'd written in 3 weeks of barely sleeping, driven by a specific and motivating fury at having watched 3 companies she'd worked for during college, and after being systematically mismanaged by people who were confident to the point of delusion. She'd had a theory about how to do it better. She'd turned out to be right. Were you scared? He asked. Constantly, she said. I was scared for those first 2 years. I just didn't let it show because if I let it show, nobody would have taken me seriously. And now? Now I'm scared about different things. She looked at him. Less about the company. He didn't ask her to elaborate. He was learning to let things arrive in their own time. He told her things too, more than he usually told people. About Diane, the marriage that had unraveled slowly, and then all at once. The way he'd seen it coming for 8 months before she'd finally said, I can't do this anymore. The particular specific grief of a relationship ending not through betrayal, but through a fundamental incompatibility that neither of them had been able to fix. He told her about the years after, building the business from scratch, the clients who didn't pay on time, and the late nights, and the constant low-level anxiety of being the only financial safety net for a small child. He told her about his brother Marcus, who would have been a better person to go through all of it with, except that Marcus lived in Seattle and had 3 kids of his own, and Ryan had never been good at asking for help. She listened to all of it. She didn't try to fix anything or reframe it or locate the optimistic angle. She just listened, and occasionally she asked a question that showed she'd been paying real attention, and it was more than he'd had from another person in a long time. Emma, for her part, was operating on the assumption that Victoria was now a fixture. She had started texting her directly. Ryan had given in and shared the number after Emma asked 3 times in 1 week. And their exchanges were largely Emma sending photos of things she found interesting and Victoria responding with relevant information. It was a dynamic Ryan found both touching and vaguely alarming. She sent me an article about oarfish at 11 p.m. on a school night, Victoria told him. What did you do? I read it and responded. He looked at her. You need to model better sleep hygiene for her. It was a fascinating article. You're not helping. She bit her lip. She has a lot going on in that head. I'm aware, he said. It's terrifying. The laughter came easier now. He'd gotten better at catching it when it happened. That quality of relief in her face when something caught her off guard, and she let it. She had a dry, quick wit that she usually kept in check, but it leaked out when she was comfortable, and it worked against the composed professional surface in a way that he liked. He was aware that he was in it now. Whatever it was, he hadn't named it, wasn't sure he needed to yet. He was aware that Emma had named it approximately 3 minutes after their 3rd meeting and was waiting with considerable patience for the adults to catch up. The first sign that something was wrong came from an unlikely direction. Ryan had a client, a mid-sized tech company called Crestline Systems, a logo refresh and brand overhaul, his biggest job of the year, whose marketing director was a woman named Sandra Cho. Sandra was efficient and decisive, which Ryan appreciated, and she had good instincts about visual language, which he appreciated more. They'd been working together for 6 weeks, and it was going well. It was Sandra who mentioned it, over the phone on a Wednesday afternoon in early December, in the tone of someone passing along information they thought you probably already had. So obviously you're connected to the Reed Capital situation, Sandra said. I was wondering if that was going to affect the timeline on our project. Ryan set down his coffee. I'm sorry. What situation? A short pause. The board push, the internal... Oh, you don't know. Tell me. Sandra hesitated. I probably shouldn't have brought it up. I only know because my brother-in-law is on the commercial side of one of Reed's portfolio companies. There's an executive, somebody on the senior team, I don't know his name, who's been making moves, trying to get a couple of board members to push Victoria Reed out of the operating seat. They're saying she's, I don't know, emotionally compromised, something about her judgment. I figured since you two were... Sandra stopped. I'm sorry. I'm gossiping. Forget I said anything. He spent the rest of the afternoon trying to forget she'd said anything. He couldn't. He knew Victoria was stressed. Had known it for weeks, actually, without her saying so directly. The phone face down on the table was more loaded now, the buzzing more frequent, and a couple of times he'd caught her looking at something on her screen with an expression she'd composed quickly when she noticed him watching. He hadn't pressed, because she was still learning to let him in, and he was still learning how much to push. He told himself she'd tell him when she was ready. He called her that evening, after Emma was in bed. She answered on the second ring. Hey. Hey. He sat in his kitchen. How are things at work? A beat. Fine. Victoria. Another beat, longer. Why are you asking? Because someone mentioned something to me today. Something about a board situation. The silence that followed was different from her usual silences. Tighter, with something tense running through it. What did they say? She asked. That someone on your senior team is trying to push you out. That they're calling your judgment into question. He paused. Is that true? Silence. Victoria? Yes. The word came out flat. More or less. He didn't say anything. Waited. His name is Donald Price, she said, and he could hear in her voice the careful management of something she'd been holding for a while, something that had weight to it. He's been on the senior operating team for 4 years. He's been building alliances on the board for the last 6 months. He wants operational control of 3 of our major portfolio companies, and he's been systematically undermining my decisions to get there. A pause. It's not new. I've been managing it. You've been managing it without telling me. It's a work problem. It's a serious problem, he said. It sounds like someone is trying to take your company from you. He's not going to succeed. Her voice was firm, but underneath the firmness there was something exhausted. I have more board support than he does. I have the documentation. I'm handling it. I know you're handling it. He rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not questioning your competence. You're carrying this alone, and you don't have to. A long pause. I'm used to carrying things alone, she said quietly. I know you are. He kept his voice even. I am too, but that's a habit, not a requirement. She didn't answer immediately. He heard her exhale slowly on the other end of the line. He's going to escalate, she said finally. Price, he's the type. He's been building towards something, and I don't know exactly what shape it's going to take. What do you need? To do my job. A beat. And to, I don't know, not think about it for a few hours sometimes. Another beat, quieter. You help with that. He didn't know what to do with that, so he just said, Okay. Okay, she said. They stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes without talking about Price again, and Ryan sat in his kitchen after they hung up and looked at nothing for a while. He understood, in a practical way, that the life she had came with things he had no frame of reference for. The scale of it, the money, the board politics, the particular specific predation of someone like Price, who had decided what he wanted and was methodically creating the conditions to take it, it was foreign to him. The closest he'd come to anything like it was a client who'd refused to pay an invoice and had required a collections letter, and that wasn't even in the same category. He couldn't fix any of it. He wasn't supposed to fix any of it, but he could be there. He could be the thing she came back to. He just hoped she'd let him. The invitation arrived on a Thursday, 11 days later. It came to his email, which she had, and it was a formal thing, a digital card for the Meridian Charitable Foundation Annual Gala, December 21st, the Hotel Ashford downtown, a fundraising event. He recognized the name of the foundation vaguely, one of the major Portland philanthropic organizations, old money, corporate donors, the kind of thing that got coverage in the business section. Victoria called 5 minutes after he saw it. Did you get it? She said. I did. He looked at the invitation on his screen. Victoria, this isn't really my kind of thing. I know. A pause. That's not why I'm asking you. Then why? She took a breath. Because Price is going to be there, and 3 of the board members he's been working on. And I have been told by my attorney very firmly that I need to appear confident and stable and not like someone who is in the process of being destabilized by internal politics. Another breath. And I want you there. He was quiet for a moment. There's something else, she said. I'm going to use it as an opportunity to address the board members directly, to make the case before he can. A pause. I want to be honest with you. It's going to be a difficult evening. Define difficult. Complicated. Politically charged. Price will be performing. His people will be performing. There will be a version of events in that room that is not the true version, and I will be trying to correct the narrative in real time while also being visible, present. She paused. I need someone next to me who isn't playing a role. He looked at the invitation. He thought about the charcoal jacket, which would not be sufficient for a gala at the Hotel Ashford. I need to rent something, he said. A brief, surprised pause. So you'll come? Yeah, he exhaled. I'll come. Ryan, you were there when Emma's teacher called, he said. You listened to the whole thing. You asked good follow-up questions about the tile situation in the bathroom. He paused. I'll be there. She was quiet for a moment that felt full. The 21st, she said. 7 o'clock. I'll send a car. You don't have to send... I want to. A brief pause. Let me do the thing I want to do. He almost laughed. That's what I said about the check. I know, she said. You were right. So am I. He hung up and sat for a minute. Then he got up and went to check on Emma, who was in bed with a flashlight and a book about deep-sea creatures, clearly not asleep, technically not breaking any rule he'd stated explicitly. Lights off, he said. Emma looked up. 5 more minutes. The anglerfish will be there tomorrow. The anglerfish doesn't care about my schedule. He sat on the edge of her bed. I'm going to a thing with Victoria. December 21st. A fancy party. Emma lowered the book, looked at him with that particular expression, the one that was doing assessment. What kind of fancy? Very. Are you nervous? A little. She considered this. She'll like you in your jacket. It's not a jacket kind of party. Oh. Emma thought about it. You should get a better jacket. He looked at her. I'm just saying, she said, and went back to her book. He turned off the flashlight on his way out, and Emma said, Dad, in a tone of profound injury. And he said, Good night, Emma. And she said, Good night, like it cost her something. And he went back to his kitchen and sat there in the quiet. December 21st, 11 days. He had a feeling that he didn't quite put into words because he was not a superstitious man, and he didn't trust feelings that couldn't be made concrete, that something was coming, that Price's escalation was going to arrive at that gala in a shape none of them had fully anticipated. He couldn't have said why he felt that. He just did. He pushed it aside. He had 11 days, and he had work, and he had Emma, and he had a jacket problem that was not going to solve itself. He opened his laptop and looked up suit rentals in Portland. The suit Ryan rented was navy, which the woman at the rental shop said was more versatile than black and less risky than anything else. He tried it on in the narrow fitting room and looked at himself in the mirror for longer than he usually looked at himself in mirrors, trying to decide if he looked like someone who belonged at a gala at the Hotel Ashford, or like someone who had rented a suit and was trying not to look like it. Probably the second one. He could live with that. Emma inspected him before he left on the 21st with the thoroughness of someone who had opinions about presentation. She walked around him once, tugged the jacket lapel slightly to the left, and said, Your tie is crooked. I know. I can't get it. She fixed it with her small hands, standing on her toes, with the focused efficiency of a person who had apparently learned to tie neckties at some point without his knowledge. He didn't ask. Okay, she said, stepping back. You look good. Yeah? You look like you. She tilted her head. Just a fancier version. His sister-in-law Greta was babysitting, a last-minute arrangement because his usual sitter had a conflict, and Greta had said yes with the particular enthusiasm of someone who wanted to hear everything afterward. Ryan kissed Emma on the top of her head, said goodbye to Greta, and walked out into the cold December night where a black car was already waiting at the curb. He wasn't good at being picked up in black cars. He sat in the back and looked out the window at Portland moving past in the dark and told himself to stop being weird about it. The Hotel Ashford was on the west side, a pre-war building that had been renovated twice and still retained the original bones. High ceilings, marble floors, brass fixtures that were probably original. Ryan had been inside once, years ago, for a colleague's wedding reception. He'd forgotten how large the lobby was. Victoria was waiting for him near the entrance, and she turned when she saw him come through the doors, and for a second she just looked at him. She was wearing something dark green, floor-length, simple in the way that expensive things are simple, with a quality of intention to it. Her hair was down, which was different from every other time he'd seen her. She looked like herself, but turned up. The composure still there, the precision still there, but wearing a different surface than the jeans and the coffee shop. "You made it," she said. "I keep making it." She looked at him for another moment. "You look nice." "My daughter fixed my tie." Something in her face moved. Of course she did. She put her hand briefly on his arm, just a touch, light but grounding somehow. "Thank you for being here." He looked around the lobby, already crowded, voices layering over the string quartet somewhere inside. "Tell me what I need to know." She did, quickly and quietly, her voice low. The three board members to watch were Gerald Hatch, Simone Park, and a man named Robert Ellison, who'd been on the board since before Victoria took the company over, and who had the specific ambiguity of someone who hadn't committed either way and could be moved in either direction. Price would be working the room. He would be charming. He was always charming at events. It was the environment he was built for. "What does he look like?" Ryan asked. "Tall, silver hair. He'll be the one laughing the loudest in any given group." Her jaw tightened slightly. "He's very good at making himself the center of gravity in a room." "And what do you need from me?" She was quiet for a moment. "Just be there. Talk to people if you want. Don't worry about performing anything." A pause. "I know this isn't your world." "I'll manage." They went in. The ballroom was large and lit in the way that made everything look significant. Warm light, high ceilings, round tables with white cloths and arrangements of winter flowers. Maybe 300 people, Ryan estimated, moving in the specific currents of a room where everyone knew roughly where everyone else stood in the hierarchy and was either gravitating toward or managing that fact. He'd been to enough client events to understand the basic architecture of professional socializing, even if this particular version of it was several magnitudes larger than anything he'd attended. Victoria moved through it with a practiced ease that was visibly different from how she moved through a coffee shop or a burger place. She was fluent here in a way that had nothing to do with comfort. She knew exactly how to be, which conversations to stop for, and for how long, which smiles to give and which to hold back. Ryan stayed close, but not too close. Close enough that she could reach him easily, far enough that he wasn't attached to her arm. He watched Price find them within the first 20 minutes. The man was exactly as described, tall, silver-haired, with the easy, slightly theatrical warmth of someone who had learned long ago that charm was a tool and had been maintaining it ever since. He crossed the room with purpose, dressed as coincidence, intercepting them near the bar with his hand already extended. "Victoria," he said warmly, like they were old friends. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Donald," her voice was entirely neutral. "You knew I'd be here." A slight smile that acknowledged the point without conceding it. He turned to Ryan with an expression of calibrated interest. "And who's this?" "Ryan Walker," Ryan said, shaking his hand. "Ryan." Price held the handshake a second too long, measuring. "What do you do, Ryan?" "Graphic design." "Oh, that's interesting." The tone of someone for whom it was not particularly interesting. "How did you two—" "We should circulate," Victoria said pleasantly. "Good to see you, Donald." She moved them away smoothly. Ryan glanced back once and found Price watching them go with an expression that was just briefly, unguardedly calculating before the smile came back. "He's already working," Ryan said quietly. "He's always working," she said. The question is what exactly he's working on tonight. They found Simone Park near the windows, a small, direct woman in her 60s with the particular authority of someone who had spent decades making consequential decisions and had gotten comfortable with it. She shook Ryan's hand with a firm grip and looked at him with the kind of frank appraisal that didn't bother him because it was at least honest. "I've heard about you," she said. "I hope it was boring," he said. She laughed, genuinely, a short bark of surprise, looked at Victoria. "I like him." Victoria said, "Good," and the word had something personal in it underneath the professional surface, something that Simone Park caught and noted with a slight nod. The evening moved. Ryan talked to people. A foundation director who wanted to discuss the gala's visual branding, of all things, and a Portland City Councilwoman who had strong opinions about signage, and a restaurateur who'd apparently been following Reed Capital's moves in the hospitality sector and wanted to make a pitch. He deflected the last one gracefully and noted that it happened, the way people approached Victoria's world through whoever was near her, looking for angles. It was a thing she lived with. He was seeing the texture of it up close for the first time. He found Gerald Hatch at the bar around 8:30. A heavy-set man in his late 50s, ruddy-faced, the kind of permanent slight impatience that comes from having been important for a long time. Ryan hadn't planned to talk to him. It happened the way things happen at events, through proximity and a momentary gap in conversation. Hatch looked at him assessingly. "You're the designer." "I am." He signaled the bartender. "You know what you're walking into, son?" Ryan looked at him steadily. "I'm just at a party." "Sure you are." Hatch accepted his drink. "Reed's a complicated situation. You seem like a straightforward person." "I am." "Then you might want to be careful." He said it without malice, almost like a practical observation from a man who'd seen a lot of events like this one and had filed most of them correctly. Things get complicated fast in rooms like this. Ryan thought about several responses. He said, "Thanks for the advice," and moved on. He found Victoria near the stage, talking to Robert Ellison, the undecided board member, the one who could go either way. Ellison was in his early 70s, lean and white-haired, with an alert, watchful quality that Ryan recognized as the particular intelligence of someone who said less than they knew. Victoria was talking to him with a different register than she'd used with anyone else tonight, not performing, actually speaking, the real version of her case about something, her hands moving slightly in a way they didn't move when she was managing. Ryan stood at a respectful distance and let her do it. He wasn't going to interrupt. He also wasn't going to leave. Ellison saw him standing there and gave him a long, quiet look. Ryan held it without doing anything in particular. After a moment, Ellison gave a small nod. Not of approval exactly, but of acknowledgement. Something registered. It was around 9 o'clock when the evening shifted. Ryan felt it before he understood it. A change in the current of the room, a new direction to the attention, a cluster of movement near the front that was too purposeful for ordinary conversation. He'd been talking to the foundation director again, and he excused himself and moved toward the cluster. He found Victoria at the center of it. Price was there. And two men Ryan didn't know, and a woman he'd seen earlier who he thought worked for the foundation, and Gerald Hatch, with his drink and his slight permanent impatience, and Simone Park, who was standing very still with an expression Ryan hadn't seen on her before, a tight, controlled something that looked like the face of a person containing a response while they gathered information. Victoria saw him. Her eyes moved to his for just a second. Then he saw what they were looking at, what several people in the cluster were holding, on phones and on two printed pages that had appeared from somewhere. He moved close enough to see over someone's shoulder. They were documents, financial documents, from the formatting, transaction records, correspondence headers. He could only see fragments, but he caught his own name twice, in two different places. Ryan Walker, Walker Design LLC. He went very still. Price was speaking, in that warm, carrying voice, the one built for rooms. I want to be clear that bringing this forward was not a comfortable decision, but given the fiduciary responsibility we all have, a pause, tactical. The board deserves to know when there's a potential conflict. What exactly is the allegation? Simone Park said. Clipped, precise. These documents suggest a payment structure. Price held up the papers. From Reed Capital's operational account to Walker Design, approximately $60,000 over 4 months. The number landed in the room like a stone in water. That's not, Victoria started. There's also correspondence, Price continued, overriding her with the polished smoothness of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Between Ryan Walker and one of our competing entities, Cascade Equity Partners, suggesting that access to Reed Capital's internal restructuring strategy was offered in exchange for— That's a lie, Ryan said. The room went quieter. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. Price looked at him with the expression of someone who had anticipated this and prepared for it. Mr. Walker, show me the document. A beat. Price turned the papers toward him, not handing them over, displaying them, like evidence at an exhibition. Ryan looked at them. He had never seen them before in his life. His name was on them. His LLC name was on them. There was a signature at the bottom of the correspondence that was in the approximate shape of his handwriting, the way a copy of something is in the approximate shape of the original. He looked up. Hatch was watching him with a heavy, closed expression. 2 of the unknown men were already on their phones. Somewhere in the crowd around them, he could feel the attention, the specific quality of 300 people pretending not to watch something while watching it completely. Victoria was looking at him, and her face had done something he hadn't seen before. The composure had fractured along a very specific line, not into emotion, but into something harder and colder. The face of a person absorbing a blow while simultaneously calculating the response. These documents are fabricated, she said clearly. I will have my legal team— Your legal team is compromised by the very relationship at issue, Price said, almost gently. Victoria, I understand this is difficult, but the board has an obligation. You don't get to tell me about obligation. Her voice was still level, but it dropped to something low and clear that cut through the ambient noise of the room like a knife through cloth. You have been building toward this for 8 months, and you have finally found your moment, and I want everyone in this room to be very clear that I understand exactly what is happening here. This isn't personal, Price said. Of course it's personal. She looked at him steadily. You want my company. You have always wanted my company. That's the whole story, Donald. Everything else is decoration. A silence. Hatch said slowly, Victoria, these documents need to be reviewed. They'll be reviewed, she said. They will also be proven false. She turned to him. Gerald, you've known me for 6 years. Whatever you think of my judgment, it's not about your judgment. He looked uncomfortable, which for Hatch was apparently a visible thing. It's about the board's responsibility. We need time to review. Ryan had been standing at the edge of this, watching it, not speaking, because there was nothing useful to say, and he knew that the loudest thing he could do in this room right now was stand still and let it play out. But he was also feeling something working its way up through the practical calm. Not anger, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific feeling of having his name used as a weapon, his LLC name on documents he'd never touched, his signature forged on correspondence he'd never written. He looked at Price, who looked back at him with that expression of practiced regret. You're good at this, Ryan said quietly. Price blinked. Just once. Just slightly. I've seen people like you before, Ryan said. Different scale, same move. He kept his voice even. You picked me because you thought I was the soft target. Small business, single father, nothing to defend himself with. He paused. You're probably used to that working. Something moved in Price's expression, a tightening, quickly controlled. Ryan, Victoria's voice low beside him. He looked at her. Don't, she said quietly. Not stop exactly, more like not here, not like this. He understood. This was her room, her fight, her years of work on the line. He stepped back. Not away, but back. Out of the center of it, back to where he'd been, present, close enough to reach. The conversation continued around them, Price performing concern, Hatch performing deliberation, Simone Park asking sharp questions that Price answered smoothly and completely untruthfully. Ryan watched, He stood with his hands in his pockets and watched and did not perform anything, because Victoria had asked him not to perform anything, and because there was nothing he could do in this room that would help. What he could do, he was doing. He was staying. After 30 minutes of it, 30 minutes that had the specific weight of a much longer time, Hatch announced that the board would convene an emergency review in the new year, that until that point no formal action would be taken, and that everyone should enjoy the remainder of the evening. Which was the kind of thing you said when you wanted a graceful exit from a terrible situation and there wasn't one available. The cluster dispersed. Price moved away with his people, exchanging brief words Ryan couldn't hear. Simone Park caught Victoria's eye across the thinning group and gave her a look that Ryan interpreted as not over, which could mean either the fight isn't over or my support isn't over. He hoped it was the second. Victoria turned to him. She looked, for the first time since he'd met her, genuinely exhausted. Not the managed tiredness of someone running on too much work and too little sleep, but something deeper, the exhaustion of a person who has been holding something up for a long time and has just been hit while doing it. "I need some air," she said. They found a side corridor that led to a service terrace. Not a guest area, cold and unlit except for the ambient glow of the city, metal furniture pushed against the wall. They stood in the cold air. Victoria had her arms folded and she was looking at nothing, jaw tight, and Ryan stood beside her and said nothing because nothing was the right thing. After a while she said, "He spent months on this. The documents are good. I could see that they were good." A pause. "He must have had someone who knew my operational accounts. Someone with access. Someone I trusted." "Yeah. I should have seen it sooner." "Maybe." She looked at him sharply. "I'm not saying you made a mistake," he said. "I'm saying maybe and maybe not, and it doesn't matter right now." She exhaled, looked back at the city glow. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for what he said about you, for your name being in those papers. That's not your fault. I brought you here. You didn't put my name in a forged document." He kept his voice flat and factual. "That's on him. That's entirely on him." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You should go. You didn't sign up for this." He looked at her. "I'm not going anywhere." "Ryan?" "Victoria." He turned to face her fully. "You came to my side of things. Emma's school, the phone calls. You showed up." He held her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him for a long moment. The city behind her, the cold between them, the remnants of an evening that had gone off the rails in a room full of people who had all performed their parts, and none of it had been real. And here, in this service corridor in the cold, two people who were both imperfect and both tired and both staying. She didn't say anything. She moved, just slightly, and he opened his arm and she leaned into him, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there in the cold and the quiet. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't the end of anything. Price was still in that ballroom, working the room, and the board was going to convene a review in January. And there were forged documents with Ryan's name on them circulating among Portland's financial elite, and all of that was still there. None of it was fixed. But she was here, and he was here, and that was one solid thing in the middle of the rest of it. After a while he said, "You said someone with access to your accounts. Internal." "Yes." "You have ideas about who?" "I have suspicions." A pause. "I've had them for a while and I didn't act on them quickly enough." "Then that's where you start." She pulled back slightly and looked at him. "That's where I start," she agreed. She straightened up, pulled herself back into the composure the way you put on a coat in the cold. Necessary, deliberate. "I need to go back in." "I know. I need to do another 30 minutes of that room. I'll be there." She looked at him one more time, and then she went back inside. Ryan stood alone on the terrace for another minute. He was cold. The suit wasn't made for December on a Portland rooftop. He looked at the city for a moment. The lights, the rain-damp streets below, the particular gray dark of a Pacific Northwest December night. And then he went back inside too. He found the ballroom, and he found Victoria, who was talking to Ellison again, calm and focused, and he positioned himself at the edge of the conversation and stayed there. And Ellison glanced at him once with that same quiet, watchful look, and Ryan gave nothing back and took nothing, just stood there. Price passed them at 10:15. He looked at Ryan with an expression that had something of assessment in it, like he was recalibrating, like Ryan had not quite responded to the evening the way he'd expected. Ryan met the look and held it without doing anything. Price moved on. The evening ended at 11. Victoria's car took them both. She asked simply, and he didn't argue. They sat in the back in the quiet, the city moving past, and she had her phone in her hand and was looking at messages but not responding to any of them. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Manageable." A pause. "Possibly." Another pause. "I don't know yet. The documents are fake, and I can prove they're fake. That's the foundation. Everything else depends on how fast I can move and how many people Price has actually flipped." Simone Park. "She's solid, I'm fairly sure." She scrolled through something on her phone. "Ellison is the question. I think he was close tonight. I think he was close to deciding." But Ryan thought about Ellison's quiet, watchful look. "He was watching you," he said. "And he was watching me." She glanced at him. "I think he was looking at whether you had someone in your corner who wasn't also calculating something." Ryan paused, turning it over. "Whether the person next to you was there for a reason other than what Price was implying." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "And you were." "And I was." She looked at her phone, looked at him, put the phone in her bag. "I'm going to fix this," she said. Not to him exactly. More like saying it out loud to make it real, to hear herself commit to it. "Price is not going to walk away with my company." "I know," he said. The car stopped at his street. He got out, and she rolled the window down, and he looked at her in the interior light of the car. Still composed, still precise, still the version of herself she'd built and maintained, but with something under it now that hadn't been visible before, something that had been let out through whatever crack the evening had opened, something that looked like it needed to be there. "Call me when you're home," he said. "It'll be late." "Call me anyway." She looked at him for a second. Then she nodded. He watched the car pull away. He stood on the cold sidewalk in his rented navy suit, and he thought about forged documents and his name in a room full of strangers, and he thought about Donald Price's practiced, regretful expression, and he thought about Victoria standing on a service terrace in the cold, pulling herself back together piece by piece. Then he went inside. He thanked Greta, who looked at his face and sensibly asked no questions. He checked on Emma, who was actually asleep this time, curled on her side with one arm over the edge of the mattress and her book on the floor. He picked the book up, set it on the nightstand. His phone rang at 12:40. He was still awake. "Home?" he said. "Home," Victoria said. He could hear in her voice that she'd been crying, or close to it. That slightly rougher texture, the tighter control over her breathing. She was managing it. She was always managing something. "Go to sleep," he said. "I have things to—" "In the morning," he said. "Tonight you go to sleep." A long pause. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. He lay in the dark after they hung up, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. The rental suit was hanging on the back of the closet door. Somewhere outside, the rain had started again, the familiar low sound of it against the window glass. He thought about his name on those documents. He thought about the signature at the bottom, in the approximate shape of his handwriting. He thought about the fact that somewhere in Victoria's organization, someone had done that, had had access to enough information to make it convincing, had fed it to Price at precisely the right moment, had decided that Ryan Walker, graphic designer, single father, person with no skin in this particular game, was a useful instrument. He wasn't afraid. He noticed that clearly, without congratulating himself on it. He simply wasn't, the way he sometimes simply wasn't things he might have expected to be. He was angry, but not in a way that would eat at him. It was a clean kind of anger, with a specific target and no excess weight to it. What mattered now was what came next. He closed his eyes. Outside, the rain continued, steady and familiar, washing down the street the way Portland rain always did in December. Without drama, without relenting, just there and ongoing and not particularly concerned with anyone's timeline. Sleep came slowly. But it came. The days after the gala had a particular texture to them. Not quite normal, not quite crisis, but the uncomfortable territory in between, where everything looked the same on the surface and nothing actually was. Ryan returned the suit on the 23rd. He paid the rental fee, hung his charcoal jacket back in the closet, and went back to the bakery client's revisions and the Crestline system's final deliverables and the ordinary machinery of his work. Emma had her last day of school before winter break, came home with a construction paper ornament and a card she'd made for Victoria, and spent the rest of the afternoon interrogating Ryan about the gala with the methodical patience of someone who had been waiting for information and was now collecting it efficiently. He told her the broad version. A difficult evening. Some complicated people. Victoria was fine, and Emma listened to this with visible skepticism. "That's not the whole thing," she said. "No," he said, "but it's the part that's mine to tell." She accepted this, which meant she'd filed it away and would return to it later. Victoria called on the 24th, Christmas Eve, not to talk about price or the board or the forged documents, but to ask what Emma wanted for the holidays because she'd apparently been thinking about it and had a few ideas and wanted to run them past him first. Ryan stood in his kitchen listening to her describe, with great seriousness, her research into marine biology educational kits, and felt something in his chest that he didn't examine too closely. "She already has the National Geographic Ocean set," he said. "I know, she told me." A pause. "She also told me she wants a real microscope, not a toy one." "She's 7. Almost 8. He laughed despite himself. "You can't buy her a real microscope." "I absolutely can." "Victoria." "She'll use it," Victoria said with the certainty of someone who had studied the evidence. "You know she'll use it." He did know. That was the problem. "Something reasonable," he said. "Please." A brief silence that told him the microscope was still under consideration. "How are you?" she asked, the shift in tone making it a different kind of question. "I'm okay. How are you?" "Working." The word carried weight. "My attorney has the documents. We've been running forensic analysis on the metadata. The signatures were done digitally. They lifted my format from a public filing and reconstructed the appearance, but the underlying file data is completely inconsistent with anything from my actual systems." "That's good." "It's a start." A pause. "The harder part is finding where Price got the internal account numbers. That's not public information. Someone gave them to him." She was quiet for a moment. "I think I know who." Ryan waited. "There's a financial analyst on my operations team, Kevin Stroud. He's been with the company for 2 years. He had access to the accounts in question, and he's been off for the last 3 months. I noticed it, and I didn't follow up on it the way I should have." Another pause. "I don't like that I missed it. You can't monitor everyone. I should have monitored him." She said it without self-pity, just flat and practical, the way she processed most things. He had access and he had motive. Price has been dangling a senior position at his new entity, we think. We're pulling Stroud's access logs now. How long until you know? "A few days, maybe a week," she exhaled. "January is going to be a full board meeting. I need the evidence clean and complete before that happens. Price will be prepared. His people will have had 2 weeks to shore up whatever narrative they're running." "Ellison," Ryan said. "Yes." A pause. "Simone spoke to him. She called me yesterday. She thinks he's leaning our way, but he wants to see the forensic report before he commits." Another pause. She also said something else. "What?" She said, and this is Simone, who says approximately 4 sincere things per year, that the way I handled the gala mattered, that I didn't collapse, I didn't get defensive, I was clear. Victoria was quiet for a second, and she said the fact that I had someone standing next to me who wasn't playing an angle also mattered to her. Ryan didn't say anything. "I'm telling you because you should know that what you did helped," Victoria said. "Even just being there. I wasn't doing anything." "I know. That's what helped." He looked out the kitchen window. The Christmas Eve dark was coming down early, the sky the particular pale gray of a Pacific Northwest winter evening. Emma was in the living room assembling something with an elaborate set of interlocking pieces that his brother had sent for Christmas, narrating the process to herself. "Come over," he said. A pause. "What?" "Tomorrow. Christmas. Come for dinner." He heard himself say it and kept going. "Emma would want you there. I'd want you there." A longer pause. "Ryan, I don't want to impose on—" "You're not imposing. I'm inviting you." Silence. He could almost hear her doing the thing she did when something landed in an unexpected place and she was deciding how to respond to it honestly. "I haven't done Christmas with a family," she said carefully, "in a long time." "It's not formal," he said. "Emma will make you watch a documentary about whales and I'll make too much food and we'll be in pajamas by 8 o'clock. A very long pause. "Pajamas by 8, she repeated. "That's the offer." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Okay, okay," he said. On. She arrived at 11 on Christmas morning with 2 bags, one containing a box that was clearly a microscope-shaped box, regardless of how it had been wrapped, and the other containing food she'd apparently decided to contribute to Christmas dinner without telling him. Ryan looked at the bags and then looked at her. "You were told something reasonable," he said. "The microscope is entry-level," she said, "for a scientist," which she is. Emma appeared in the hallway in Christmas pajamas, assessed the situation in approximately 2 seconds, and said, "Is that what I think it is?" with a specificity that suggested she had in fact suspected and was confirming. "Don't look at me," Ryan said. Emma looked at Victoria. "You're my favorite person," she said with complete seriousness, and went to help carry the bag. The morning had the loose, unplanned quality of a holiday that no one has over-organized. Emma set up the microscope on the kitchen table with Victoria's help, and they spent 45 minutes looking at things. A hair, a piece of onion skin, a fragment of leaf from the houseplant. And Emma narrated what she was seeing with the focused excitement of someone whose specific kind of curiosity had just been given a new instrument. Ryan cooked. He made too much food, as promised. A roast chicken he was actually good at, roasted vegetables, the green bean thing Emma tolerated because it had garlic in it. Victoria sat at the kitchen counter at one point while Emma was distracted with the microscope and said quietly, "This is nice." He glanced at her. She was looking at Emma, at the kitchen, at the ordinary mess of a holiday morning. "You say that like it surprises you," he said. "It does. A little." She turned her coffee mug in her hands. "I'm not used to this being available. For me." He didn't ask her to clarify. He understood what she meant. "It's available," he said. She looked at him for a moment, nodded once, something settling in her expression. They ate at the actual dining table, which Ryan had to clear of design materials and Emma's homework, and Emma talked through most of the meal about what she planned to examine next under the microscope, with occasional digressions into other topics. And Victoria listened and contributed and ate the green bean thing without commenting on it, which Ryan noticed and appreciated more than he said. It was imperfect in the specific ways that good things are imperfect. The chicken was slightly overdone on one side. Emma knocked over her water glass. Ryan couldn't find the serving spoon and had to use a ladle. None of it was the difficulty that mattered. The difficulty that mattered was underneath the ordinariness of it. The fact that Victoria sat at his table on Christmas Day with the contained quality of someone who was letting something in that they'd been holding out for a long time, and that he could see it happening and couldn't make it easier for her, could only let it happen at whatever speed it needed. After dinner, Emma did make them watch a documentary. Ryan fell asleep briefly on the couch and woke up to find Emma had covered him with the throw blanket and was explaining something to Victoria in an undertone, both of them watching the screen. He lay still for a moment, watching them without announcing he was awake. Emma said something he couldn't catch. Victoria said just audibly, "I know, I think so too." He didn't ask what they were talking about. Some things weren't his to know. The forensic report came back on January 3rd. Ryan was at his desk when Victoria called, and he knew from the first syllable of her voice that it was significant. "Stroud," she said. It was Stroud. The access logs show he pulled the account record 6 times over 3 months, in small increments, always during off hours. He used a VPN, but it was routed through a server that Price's other entity uses. A pause. He also forwarded 2 internal emails to an external address that traces back to a law firm Price retains. Do you have all of it documented? My forensic team has been building the package since the 28th. It's complete. Her voice had a quality to it, the relief of evidence secured, the particular satisfaction of a theory proven, but underneath both of those, something still tightly wound, still waiting. I'm going to Stroud today. I'm terminating him and presenting him with the documentation simultaneously. My attorney will be present. What does that do to Price? It removes his corroboration. If Stroud testifies, and given what we have on him, he'll testify, the document chain collapses. A pause. Price's whole case is built on the idea that the financial records were legitimate. Once we show they were constructed using stolen internal data by someone on my payroll who was being paid by Price, the narrative falls apart. The board meeting's when? January 14th, 11 days. She exhaled. I need to brief Simone and Ellison before then. Personally, not through attorneys. I want them to hear it from me. Can I do anything? A pause. No. Then, yes, actually. Can you write something down for me? A timeline of when we met. First meeting, the restaurant, the coffee place. With Emma. Dates, if you remember them. He frowned. Why? Because Price's document is dated in October. If I can show that you and I had no substantive contact before November, which is true, the payment structure he fabricated doesn't have a timeline that makes sense. It's one more thread to pull. A pause. I know it's strange to ask you to. It's not strange. He was already opening a document on his screen. Give me an hour. He sent her a detailed timeline at 1:30. Dates, locations, the Route 217 breakdown, each meeting afterward. Emma's involvement starting the third meeting. He'd cross-referenced his calendar and his texts and the notes he kept loosely for billing purposes, which put times and places on most of it. It was accurate, and it was specific, and it was the kind of documentation that made forged documents look like what they were. She texted back, "This is exactly what I needed. Thank you." He sent back, "Keep me posted." She did. Over the following 10 days, she kept him informed in the spare, efficient way she communicated when she was focused. Brief calls, specific updates, no editorializing. Stroud had been terminated and had engaged his own attorney within hours. Price had apparently gone quiet, which Victoria's attorney said was not a good sign. It meant he was regrouping, not retreating. The brief to the board was taking shape. Simone Park had reviewed the forensic report and called it airtight, which was, Victoria said, the highest praise Simone gave. Ryan went about his work. He finished the Crestline Systems project, invoiced them, started preliminary talks with a new client, a small Pacific Northwest winery looking to rebrand. He picked Emma up from school, made dinner, helped with the reading log, went to bed, got up, and did it again. The ordinary architecture of his days, unchanged, except that it was different. He was aware that something was depending on the next 11 days, something that wasn't his and that he couldn't affect, and that he cared about in a way that required him to hold it loosely because there was nothing else to do with it. He called her every night. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes it was 10 minutes, and most of it was silence, one of them on either end of the phone not needing to say much. She told him on the 9th that she'd had dinner with her parents for the first time in 4 months. They lived in Eugene, a distance that was apparently as much emotional as geographic, and that her mother had asked about him specifically, by name, which Victoria said with a particular care that suggested the meaning of it was larger than it sounded. "What did you tell her?" Ryan asked. "The truth," Victoria said. "That you're—" She stopped. "That you're someone I trust." He turned that over. "That's a big thing, for you." "Yes," she said. "It is." He didn't push further. Some things you let sit where they landed. The board meeting was on a Tuesday, 11 a.m., Reed Capital's main conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown that Ryan had walked past 100 times without knowing what was in it. He didn't go. He wasn't invited, and he wasn't needed there. This was Victoria's room, her evidence, her years of work being defended in the specific language of people who spoke that language. He went to his own office, which was the spare bedroom he'd converted 4 years ago, And he worked on the winery project and he watched his phone. Emma was at school. The house was quiet. He made coffee and listened to the rain and designed a wine label and didn't look at the clock more than was reasonable. Victoria texted at 12:47, "Still going." He sent back, "Take your time." At 2:19 she called. He answered immediately. "It's over," she said. He sat back in his chair. "Tell me." She did, in the compressed, sequential way she told things when she was processing them as she spoke. The forensic report had been presented in full. Stroud's access logs, the VPN routing, the external email chain, the timeline inconsistencies in Price's documents. Ellison had asked 3 questions, each one cutting directly to the evidentiary core. He'd read the report thoroughly, that was clear. Simone had said almost nothing, which in Simone's case meant she'd made up her mind before she walked in and was watching everyone else catch up. Price had defended his position for 40 minutes. He was good. He'd been doing this for 30 years and he didn't rattle easily. He'd questioned the forensic methodology, the chain of custody on the documents, the independence of the forensic team. He'd suggested that Stroud might have been acting independently, not on his instruction. He'd been, by all accounts, exactly as smooth and prepared as Ryan had known he would be. But the evidence was what it was. And at the end of it, Ellison had said, quietly and with the authority of someone who had weighed everything and arrived at a position he was comfortable with, that he found the documentation against Price compelling and the defense insufficient. Hatch had abstained. 2 board members had sided with Price. 3, including Simone and Ellison, had sided with Victoria. Price had been removed from all operational roles effective immediately. "And your company?" Ryan asked. "Mine," she said. Flat, simple, certain. "Completely mine," he exhaled. "Good." "Ryan." Her voice was different suddenly, quieter, slightly rough at the edges. "There were a few minutes in that room where I wasn't sure. He's very good, and the board was... It could have gone the other way." "But it didn't." "No, because the truth was the truth, and we could prove it." A pause. "And because Ellison said something at the end he said the integrity of the leadership had to be evaluated in full, not just the documents. And then he looked at Gerald Hatch, and he said he'd found Victoria Reed's conduct throughout this process to be consistent with someone who had nothing to hide." Another pause, quieter. "He didn't have to say that. It wasn't about the motion. He said it anyway." Ryan thought about Ellison's watchful, quiet look at the gala, the small nod. "He was paying attention," Ryan said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. So was I. Something in the silence between them had a weight to it that neither of them moved to break immediately. Ryan sat in his home office with the rain outside and the wine label half finished on his screen, and Victoria was wherever she was, probably still in the building, probably in some corridor or office away from the conference room. And the distance between them felt both very ordinary and strangely significant. "I need to do a few things here," she said finally. "Papers to sign, calls to make, Stroud's HR process. There's about 4 hours of work still." "Do it." "Can I come by after?" "Yeah," he said. "I'll have Emma. We'll be home. I want to tell her in person that things are okay." He paused. "She'll want details." "I know. I'll give her the age-appropriate version." "Victoria," he said. "She's almost 8. A sound that might have been a laugh, short and slightly surprised. "I'll give her the complete version, lightly edited." "Better." She came at 7:15. Ryan had made soup. Nothing elaborate, just the tomato soup with actual tomatoes that Emma liked, and grilled cheese sandwiches because it was January and it was cold and some nights called for that specifically. Emma greeted Victoria at the door and said, "Dad said things are okay? Are things okay?" with the directness that was her primary mode. "Things are okay," Victoria said. Emma looked at her for a moment with that patient, assessing expression. "Your eyes are tired," she said. "It's been a long day. Do you want soup?" "Yes," Victoria said. "Please." They sat at the kitchen table and ate soup, and Emma asked what had happened, and Victoria told her, edited only enough for a 7-year-old, which meant it still included the forensic report and the concept of internal conspiracy, because Emma was who she was. Emma listened with complete attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions with the focus of a person who needed to understand the full picture before forming an opinion. When Victoria finished, Emma said, "So the bad man is gone." "He's gone, yes." "Good." Emma went back to her soup with finality, the matter resolved to her satisfaction. Ryan looked at Victoria across the table. She was eating soup in his kitchen, tired in her eyes the way Emma had seen it, and something about the shape of the three of them at that table, the mess on the counter, the half-finished grilled cheese, the rain on the window, felt like the most real thing he'd been inside in a long time. After dinner, Emma went to get ready for bed, and Ryan and Victoria sat at the cleared table with their coffee and the quiet of the house settling around them. The lamp in the corner threw a warm light. The rain continued. "What happens now?" Ryan asked. "Now I rebuild," she said. The board's confidence, some of the relationships price poisoned, two of the portfolio companies where he'd been making moves. It's months of work. But it's your work. Yes. Something in her face. It's mine. He turned his coffee mug. And personally, what happens personally? She looked at him across the table. That composed, precise look she had, but with the layer underneath it that he'd learned to see. The person who was in there behind the armor, making decisions about how much to let through. "I don't know exactly," she said. I'm not good at planning the personal things. The work things I can build a model for. The personal things are harder for me. I know. But I know I don't want to stop." She held his gaze. "Whatever this is, I don't want to stop." He nodded. "Neither do I. Even though it's," she gestured slightly, "complicated. My world is complicated. My world has a 7-year-old who will ask you detailed questions about marine invertebrates at breakfast," he said. "We're both complicated." She looked at him for a moment, then she laughed. The real one, the one that escaped before she could decide about it. And it filled the kitchen briefly and then settled, and she shook her head. "Fair point," she said. Emma appeared in the hallway in pajamas to say goodnight, and she gave Ryan a perfunctory hug, and then turned to Victoria and gave her a longer one, both arms around her waist with the uncalculated generosity that children have when they've decided about someone. And Victoria's face did something that she didn't manage, something that went past the composure entirely. She held Emma for a second longer than necessary. "Good night," Emma said, and went to bed. Victoria stood in the hallway looking at the empty space Emma had left, and Ryan stood beside her, and neither of them said anything, because there wasn't anything that needed to be said about that moment. It had said itself. He walked her to the door when she left, the cold coming in from outside, and she turned on the porch with her coat collar up and looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it. The gala, the timeline, the phone calls, Christmas." She paused. "Emma." "Emma's not something I did," he said. "She did that herself." "I know." A quiet smile, small and real. "That's what I mean." She went to her car. He stood in the doorway until the taillights disappeared around the corner, and then he closed the door and stood in the hallway of his house in the quiet, with the lamp on in the corner and the rain on the roof and the sound of Emma's sleep coming from the room at the end of the hall. It wasn't a perfect situation. It wasn't going to become one. The complications were real. The difference in their worlds, the visibility she carried, the things that came with her life that he was only beginning to understand the shape of. The work was still ahead of both of them, the ordinary daily work of two imperfect people trying to do something real. But she'd said, "I don't want to stop," and he'd said, "Neither do I," and that was a foundation. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to check on Emma, who was deeply asleep, one arm over the edge of the mattress the way she always slept. He picked up the book from the floor and set it on the nightstand. Then he went to bed. He slept better than he had in weeks. February came in cold and stayed that way. The weeks after the board meeting had their own particular rhythm, quieter than the weeks before, but not without weight. Victoria had meant what she said about rebuilding. Ryan watched it happen from the sideline, not close enough to be inside it, but close enough to see what it cost her. The calls that ran past midnight. The weekends that disappeared into work. The particular quality of exhaustion she carried in January and most of February, the kind that sleep doesn't fully fix because it goes down to the structural level, the place where you keep the things you actually care about. She didn't disappear. That was the thing he noticed, and kept noticing. She was busy in ways she hadn't been before the gala, pulled in directions he couldn't always follow, and she was sometimes distracted and occasionally short with him in ways she'd catch and correct. And there were stretches of 3 or 4 days where their contact was a handful of texts and one brief phone call. But she didn't disappear. She checked in. She asked about Emma specifically, by name, asked what Emma had said and what Emma was working on, and whether Emma had made any new scientific discoveries with the microscope. She called on a Thursday night in late January just to say she was thinking about him, which she said in a flat, slightly awkward way, like she was learning the language of that kind of statement and wasn't fluent yet, and then moved on before he could respond too much. He matched her rhythm. He didn't push for more than she had available, and he didn't pretend the gaps weren't there, and he kept building his own days. The winery project, a new client, Emma's school events, the loose, ordinary structure of a life he'd spent 3 years constructing carefully enough that it didn't fall apart when something else was demanding his attention. Emma, for her part, was conducting her own relationship with Victoria at her own pace, which required no management from Ryan and was largely conducted through text messages and the occasional hand-delivered diagram. On a Saturday in mid-February, Emma had sent Victoria a photograph of something she'd found under the microscope, a cross-section of a piece of her own hair, which she'd figured out how to prepare herself, along with a 3-sentence explanation of what she was seeing, written with the precision of a person who had been thinking about how to explain it correctly. Victoria had called within 10 minutes, not to Ryan, to Emma directly. Ryan had watched Emma sit on the kitchen counter and talk for 25 minutes, swinging her feet, explaining the preparation process with the authority of someone who had developed a technique and wanted credit for it. He'd made coffee and listened and not said a word. When Emma hung up, she said, "She wants me to send her all the ones I've taken so far." "I heard." "She said she's going to print some of them." He looked at his daughter on the kitchen counter, 7 years old, 3 months from 8, with her dark, serious eyes and her precise questions, and the specific quality of happiness she had right now that was different from her ordinary happiness. Fuller, somehow, wider. He'd been watching for it without wanting to name it, afraid of naming it too early, and having to explain later why the name didn't apply. He was starting to think it applied. "She's going to frame them," Emma said with satisfaction. "In her office." "Did she say that?" "She implied it." Emma jumped off the counter. "I'm going to take more." She went to get the microscope. Ryan stood in the kitchen and let the morning settle around him. The conversation he'd been waiting for happened on a Wednesday evening in late February, and it arrived the way important conversations often do. Not announced, not prepared, just there suddenly in the middle of something ordinary. They were at his kitchen table. Victoria had brought takeout, Thai, because Emma had recently decided Thai food was her favorite and had been conducting a methodical survey of Portland's options. And the 3 of them had eaten, and Emma had gone to do her reading homework, and Ryan was clearing the containers, and Victoria was at the counter with her second cup of tea, and she said, "I need to tell you something." He didn't turn around immediately. He tied off the trash bag. Then he turned. She was looking at her tea mug. Not at him. At the mug, the way she looked at things when she was composing what she was going to say. "When I met you," she said, "I was in the middle of something I didn't know how to name. The price situation was already developing. My board relationships were strained. I'd been running the company for 4 years and I don't know the right word. Not burned out. Emptied out, maybe. Like I'd been pouring from the same reserve for so long that I'd gotten to a level I didn't know was the bottom." He sat down across from her. "I hid who I was from you because I've done that my whole adult life," she continued. "Not just the money. All of it. I present a version of myself that's functional and competent and in control, and I keep everything else separate, and most of the time it works fine, because most of the time there isn't anyone who's trying to see past it." She finally looked up at him. "You kept looking past it anyway. You didn't make a thing of it. You just kept looking, and eventually there wasn't much point in maintaining the surface." Ryan kept still. He'd learned to do this with her, to not fill the silence before she was finished. "What I want to say," she said, more carefully, is that I know what you didn't get from this. I know the gala was I know your name was in those documents, and people in that room believed things about you that weren't true, and you never once made that about you. You just stayed. She paused. And I know the last 2 months I've been hard to reach. I know I've been inconsistent. I know there are parts of my life that are still loud and demanding and not going to get quieter soon. Victoria, let me finish. Not harsh. Careful. I've been trying to figure out how to say this correctly, and I don't think there is a correct way, so I'm just going to say it plainly. She looked at him with the level, direct look she had when she was being most honest. I don't want a version of this where I'm managing the relationship the same way I manage everything else. I don't want to fit you into a schedule or keep you at a distance that feels safe. I want the actual thing, whatever that looks like, with all the parts of it that are inconvenient and complicated. She paused. I'm telling you that because I think you deserve to know what I'm offering before you decide whether you want it. The house was quiet, except for the distant sound of Emma reading aloud to herself, which she did sometimes when a passage caught her. Ryan looked at the woman across his kitchen table, the woman who had been standing in the rain on Route 217 4 months ago, with her arms folded and her composure intact, and her luxury car broken down, who had spent those 4 months being gradually, imperfectly, more honest with him than she'd been with almost anyone, who had sat at his table on Christmas Day and held his daughter and let something in that she'd been holding out for years. I know what you're offering, he said. I've known for a while. And? He looked at her steadily. I'm not interested in easy. Easy hasn't actually worked out that well for me. He paused. I'm interested in real, which you are. Another pause. Even when you're a pain in the ass about it. Something crossed her face, the fractional relaxation of someone who had been braced for a different answer. I am sometimes a pain in the ass, she acknowledged. You hid being a billionaire for 3 weeks. I know. You sent my daughter a research-grade microscope. She needed it. You argued with me about a car pickup. I was right about the car pickup. He shook his head, but there was a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth that he wasn't entirely managing. Yeah, he said. You were. She looked at him across the table. The kitchen lamp, the leftover scent of Thai food, the rain outside that seemed to be Portland's permanent weather condition. Nothing about it was cinematic. It was just a kitchen and 2 people in it who had come at each other sideways and were choosing, clearly and plainly, to stay. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Emma appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, which she'd apparently put on without being asked, which was either personal growth or a strategy to forestall being asked to do it. Are you 2 done talking? She asked. Yes, Ryan said. She came in and climbed onto the counter stool with the wobbly leg. Good, because I have a question about what I saw under the microscope today, and I need both of you to hear it because Dad doesn't know enough biology. That's fair, Ryan said. Emma looked at Victoria. Do you know about cell walls in plant tissue? Some, Victoria said. Good. Emma settled herself. Okay, so here's the thing. Ryan got up to get more tea, and Emma began explaining with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for an audience, and Victoria listened with her elbows on the counter, and the kitchen filled up with Emma's voice and the rain outside and the warmth of a Wednesday evening that was nothing special and everything ordinary and exactly, precisely enough. Potat. March arrived and brought the first real warmth of the approaching spring, the kind of weather Portland produced grudgingly in the early months. A week of thin, tentative sun followed by 3 days of rain, then back again, the city negotiating with the season. The story came out in a business publication in the second week of March. Not a tabloid this time, not the candid photo variety, a proper piece, 3,000 words in a Pacific Northwest business journal covering the full arc of the Price situation. The journalist had been thorough. She'd gotten the forensic report, the board vote, Stroud's termination. She'd interviewed Simone Park, who gave 2 sentences that were nevertheless pointed and clear. She'd reached out to Ryan for comment, which he'd declined, and the piece reflected that with a single line, Walker, a Portland-based graphic designer who declined to comment, was the subject of forged documents presented at the December gala. He read it on his phone over coffee. Then he set the phone down and went to make Emma's lunch. Victoria called an hour later. Have you seen it? Yes. I wanted to tell you before it came out. I knew it was coming, but the publication date moved up. A pause. The journalist was fair as these things get. It was fine, he said. Your name is in it. My name was going to be in it either way. He finished the lunch, snapped the container closed. This version has the actual facts in it, which is better than the other version. Ryan. Something in her voice, the not quite guilt, but adjacent to it. I know this wasn't what you signed up for, any of it. Stop, he said, not unkindly. I'm serious. So am I. He leaned against the counter. I'm a grown person who made choices. Nobody put me in that gala. I went because I wanted to be there. Whatever came with it, I'm okay with what came with it. He paused. I need you to stop carrying guilt about it because you didn't do anything to me, and I need you to believe that. A long silence. I'm working on it, she said. Good. Another pause. The board wants me to make a statement at next month's shareholder meeting about the restructuring going forward, about the leadership review, about... She stopped. It's going to be public, more than the article. There will be press. Okay? If you're visible in my life, you're visible in that. He thought about it. Practically, plainly, the way he thought about things. I'm not afraid of being visible, he said. I'd want to know in advance when things are coming. That's all. I can do that? Then we're fine. She exhaled, a long, quiet exhale that had a week's worth of held tension in it. You're annoyingly reasonable, she said. I know. He picked up his coffee. Emma told me to tell you that the onion skin slides are the best ones, and she wants to know if you have an actual botanical specimen she can use. A pause. Then, helplessly, I have a fern in my office. She's going to want a leaf. Tell her I'll bring one Friday. She'll hold you to it. I know. A beat, quiet and warm. I'm counting on it. The shareholder meeting was in April, and it was exactly as public as Victoria had said it would be. Ryan didn't attend. They'd talked about it and agreed that there was no reason for him to be in the room, and that being visible at the shareholder meeting was a different kind of visibility than he was ready to perform. He was fine with the Business Journal article. He was less interested in standing at a podium. He watched a clip of it online that evening because Marcus sent him a link. Victoria stood at the front of a glass-walled conference room. The real version of her, the CEO version, the one who had built a $400 million company from a business plan she'd written in 3 sleepless weeks. And she spoke about the past 6 months with a clarity and precision that was unmistakably her. She didn't soften the price situation or make it smaller than it was. She said directly that the company had been attacked from within and had survived it, and that the survival was not incidental, but was the result of infrastructure she'd spent 4 years building, relationships she'd maintained and invested in, and a board that had ultimately chosen evidence over narrative. She also said something that surprised him. She said, I've learned this year that the strength of a company is not separable from the character of the people who lead it. And character is not something you demonstrate in boardrooms. It's something that's visible in everything else, every other room, every ordinary situation. I've been reminded of that this year in ways I didn't expect, and I'm grateful for it. Ryan watched the clip twice. He didn't think she was talking about him specifically. He thought she was talking about something larger that he'd been part of. One element of a year that had clarified something in her about what she was actually doing and why. But he also thought, quietly and without making too much of it, that maybe he was a small part of what she meant. He texted her, "Good speech." She texted back, "I meant it." He put his phone in his pocket and went to help Emma with her homework, which was long division, which Emma had decided was a personal insult designed specifically to make her life difficult. Emma turned 8 in May, on a Saturday that came in warm and bright, the first genuinely warm Saturday Portland had offered since September. She'd asked for a birthday party at the Natural History Museum's marine exhibit, a contained group, 7 friends, the kind of organized chaos that requires a willing adult to manage the logistics, while another adult keeps 8-year-olds from pressing their faces on every exhibit case simultaneously. Victoria had offered to help. Ryan had said yes without overthinking it, which was itself a thing worth noting. The absence of hesitation, the ease of saying yes, the fact that it felt like the natural answer. They spent 2 hours at the museum, and Victoria turned out to be excellent at the specific task of managing 8 8-year-olds in a museum environment. She was direct with them in a way that respected their intelligence. She answered their questions seriously, and she had a facility with the marine biology content that made her Emma's designated expert for the afternoon, which Emma accepted with the grace of someone who had known this would happen. After, they went back to Ryan's house for cake, and the specific chaos of a children's birthday party winding down. Parents arrived at intervals, children were collected, and by 5 o'clock the house had returned to a manageable state, and Emma was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by birthday presents with the glassy-eyed contentment of a child who has had a full and excellent day. Victoria was in the kitchen helping Ryan clean up, which mostly meant she was doing it while he tried to help, and she was better at it, and they'd reached an unspoken negotiation where he washed and she organized. Emma had put on a documentary in the other room, which meant she was 5 minutes from falling asleep. "She's good," Victoria said, handing him a plate. "At people. She makes other kids feel like she sees them." Ryan looked toward the living room. "Yeah, she's always been that way. She didn't get that from just being raised well." Victoria said it carefully, like she'd been thinking about it. "Some kids are just like that, wired for it." He took the plate. "Her mom was like that. When she was present, she was very present. Emma got the good version of that." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You do that sometimes. Give Diane credit." He thought about it. "She's not all bad. She made some choices that were wrong for everyone involved. She's also Emma's mother." He set the plate in the cabinet. "I can hold both. Most people can't." It took a while. He handed her the next plate. "The first year I was pretty angry at everything, but mostly at her. It gets in the way if you let it, the anger. Emma would ask about her, and I'd have to figure out how to answer honestly without letting the anger come through." He paused. "She loves her mom. She has every right to love her mom. That's not mine to mess with." Victoria was quiet. "What?" he said. "Nothing. I'm just—" She accepted the plate, set it on the stack. "I think about what it cost you to be that measured about it. Over time, consistently, with a kid watching." He shrugged. "What was the alternative?" "A lot of people would have taken the alternative." "Yeah, well," he handed her the last plate. "I had a daughter who needed me to be better than that." Victoria set the plate in the cabinet and turned to face him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, looking at him with that look she had when she was seeing something she hadn't seen before, or seeing something familiar in a new way. "Can I say something?" she said. "You're going to either way." A small, brief smile. Then, seriously. "When I met you on that road in November, I thought I was doing something decent, letting someone help me, letting myself be the person who needs help for once instead of the person who handles everything." She paused. "I didn't know I was actually meeting someone who was going to change how I thought about what I was doing with my life." He waited. "I've built something real," she said. "The company, the work, it's real, and I'm proud of it. But I'd been operating like the company was the whole thing, like everything personal was secondary to the main event." She looked at him steadily. "You don't operate that way. Emma doesn't. The whole structure of your days is the personal is the main event, and the work is what you do to support it." She paused. "I'd forgotten that was an option. I think I'd known it once, and then I got busy, and I forgot." Ryan dried his hands on the dish towel. He didn't say anything right away, because she'd said something that needed a moment, that deserved not to be moved past too quickly. "You remembered," he said finally. "You reminded me." She looked at him. "That's what I wanted to say." From the living room, Emma's documentary murmured. Something about deep ocean trenches. A narrator with a calm voice talking about pressure and darkness, and the strange things that survived in both. Emma herself had gone quiet, which meant she was either deeply absorbed or asleep. Ryan looked at Victoria in his kitchen on a May Saturday, with birthday cake still on the counter and 8 small plates in the drying rack and the warm late afternoon light coming through the window. "Stay for dinner," he said. She looked at him. "Nothing elaborate. Whatever we have." He opened the refrigerator, assessed. "I can do eggs. Emma likes eggs for dinner when she's too tired for real food. Eggs, Victoria said. Don't make it weird. It's good eggs. She was quiet for a second, then, okay. He made eggs. Scrambled with cheese with the specific ratio Emma had deemed correct at some point last year and which had become the standard. Victoria sat on the counter stool with the wobbly leg, which she'd learned to manage, and they talked quietly while Emma slept on the living room floor and the Saturday evening came down warm and easy outside. It was by any measure an ordinary meal. Bad circumstances for it, honestly. Birthday party debris on the counter, a sleeping child 20 feet away. Nothing elegant about any of it. Ryan put eggs on a plate and set it in front of Victoria, and she ate them without ceremony, and it was fine. It was easy. It was the kind of easy that takes time to build and isn't really easy at all underneath, but feels like it from the outside. That was the thing about real things. They look simple from a distance. You had to get close to see the work in them. Ryan. 6 months after a rainy Tuesday on Route 217, Ryan Walker was still a graphic designer with a small business and a full client roster and a 12-year-old Subaru that needed new brake pads. He was still a single father, still the person who made dinner and enforced bedtimes and showed up to school events and fixed the wobbly leg on the counter stool, finally, on a Sunday afternoon in June when he had 2 free hours and the right screwdriver. None of that had changed. It wasn't supposed to change. The life he'd built was his, chosen and maintained, and it fit him in the specific way that things fit you when you've spent time figuring out what you actually need instead of what you thought you'd want. What had changed was less visible and more structural. The way a house changes when you finally fix the thing in the foundation that you'd been working around. He was the same person in most of the ways that mattered. He was also a person who had let someone in fully, who had stood in a public room with his name on forged documents and held still, who had learned that being present for someone didn't require fixing anything, just staying in proximity to the difficulty without flinching from it. He'd learned that from Emma, actually, years before Victoria. Emma had been teaching him that lesson since she was 4 years old, the importance of just being there, of not performing reassurance but simply being a consistent physical presence in the same room as whatever was hard. He just needed to remember that it applied to adult relationships too. Victoria Reed remained, publicly and by any account, one of the more formidable figures in Pacific Northwest business. She rebuilt the board relationships that Price had damaged, correctly identified 2 additional people in her organization who had been feeding information to Price's network, and restructured her senior team with the particular thoroughness of someone who had learned a hard lesson and intended not to repeat it. She was not softer after the crisis. That wasn't quite the right word. She was more precise, more deliberate about who she trusted and what she said and when. The crisis had clarified something in her rather than diminishing it, which was, Ryan thought, something you couldn't engineer. It either happened to you or it didn't. She was also, gradually and without announcement, a regular presence in a house on the east side of Portland that had a kitchen counter stool with a previously wobbly leg, a microscope on the dining room table, and a 7, now 8-year-old who texted her links to marine biology papers at unreasonable hours and received, reliably and without complaint, substantive responses. There was nothing convenient about any of it. Their worlds were different in ways that didn't fully resolve. The gap between his ordinary Tuesday and her ordinary Tuesday was significant and required constant small adjustments, a mutual ongoing willingness to meet somewhere in the middle that wasn't always perfectly located. She was sometimes remote when she was under pressure, retreating into the composed professional version of herself that had kept things functional for years and was a hard habit to break. He was sometimes too quiet when he was working through something, too self-sufficient, too willing to handle things alone rather than say he could use another person. They caught each other at it, called it out, adjusted. Not gracefully, always, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with friction, sometimes with the particular frustration of 2 people who are well matched enough to fight about things that actually matter. Emma watched all of this with great interest and occasional, unsolicited commentary. "You're both stubborn," she told Ryan on a Tuesday evening in June, with the forensic detachment of a scientist observing a phenomenon. "I know, but not in the same ways. That's important." He looked at her. "Where did you get that?" She shrugged. "Victoria said it." He was briefly unsure what to do with that. "When?" "When she was helping me with my science project. We were talking about you." Emma said it without self-consciousness. She said you're stubborn about protecting things, and she's stubborn about controlling things, and that those are compatible because they're not competing for the same space. Ryan sat with that for a moment. She's not wrong, he said. I know. Emma went back to her project. I told her that. He looked at his daughter, almost 8, now fully 8, growing in the specific direction that was entirely hers, precise and curious and generous in her assessments when she'd decided someone deserved them. He thought about what it had cost him to raise her alone for 3 years, the specific loneliness of being the only adult in a house, the way it compressed everything into you because there was nowhere else for it to go. He hadn't known fully that he'd been lonely. He'd been too busy to recognize it clearly. You don't always see the shape of the space you're living in until something comes in and fills part of it, and then you look at the room differently. Something had come in, not perfectly, not without its own difficulties and complications, but something real, which is the only kind worth accounting for. He thought about what he'd tell someone if someone asked him what the last 7 months had been. He'd probably say something practical. Met someone, complicated situation, things worked out reasonably well. Because he was not a person who reached for the large statement, who dramatized his own life, who confused the feeling of a thing with the thing itself. But underneath the practical version was something truer and harder to say. Something about what it means to be a person who has learned to keep the doors locked, who has good reasons for the locks and has maintained them carefully and doesn't open them for anything that hasn't earned it. And then one rainy November night on a deserted stretch of highway, you stop for a woman with a broken car, and 3 minutes later you fix the immediate problem, and somehow 2 months after that you're standing in a room full of strangers with your name being weaponized and you're holding still because the person next to you needs you to, and you realize the lock is open. It opened somewhere along the way without your full awareness, somewhere between the burger and the coffee and the Christmas morning microscope and the soup in January. And you can close it again or you can let it stay, and you know which one is right even if it's harder. You let it stay. That was the truth underneath the practical version. The locks were open, not because someone forced them. She never forced anything, moved patiently and took what was offered and never pressed for more. But because something about the combination of who she was and who he was made him willing. Made the risk seem worth taking, not because the odds were certain, because they never are. But because the alternative, the careful, contained life with all the doors managed and no one fully in, was survivable, but not quite living. He'd been surviving fine. Emma needed him to actually live. He thought about the rainy highway sometimes. He thought about what would have happened if he'd kept driving, if he'd seen the hazard lights and calculated the effort and the late dinner and the 7 minutes and decided it wasn't his problem. He'd never know, obviously. The whole exercise was pointless. But he thought about it sometimes the way you think about the small fulcrum moments, the tiny decisions that carry more weight than they look like they should. You stop for a person in the rain, not because you're sure it'll matter, because you're the kind of person who stops, and that's who you've decided to be, and you let the rest follow from that. The rest had followed from that, imperfectly, eventfully, with forged documents and a board fight, and a Christmas morning and a fern from a 14th floor office, and a microscope and 8 years old and soup in January, and eggs on a Saturday and a counter stool with a wobbly leg, finally fixed. In June, Victoria took Emma to the Oregon coast for a Saturday. Ryan had work, a project deadline, unavoidable, and they'd gone without him, the two of them, and sent him photographs throughout the day. Tide pools, a harbor seal on a rock, something Emma had found in the sand that required immediate biological identification, and which Victoria had looked up on her phone and reported back with complete seriousness. The last photo came at 4 in the afternoon. Emma knee-deep in a tide pool, examining something in her cupped hands, her face entirely focused. Victoria had taken it without Emma knowing, and the quality of it, the attention in it, said something that didn't need any caption. Ryan had looked at that photo for a long time. He saved it. He put it as his phone's lock screen, which he hadn't changed in 2 years, and every time he picked up his phone for the rest of that month he saw it. Emma in the tide pool, the coast behind her, completely absorbed in what she was holding, all of 8 years old and entirely herself. That evening, when they came back sandy and tired, Emma came through the door saying Dad there was a nudibranch with a volume and urgency that implied he should already know why this was significant. And Victoria came in behind her still in her coat, carrying a bag of things they'd apparently collected on the beach. And she looked at him across the room with that look. The level, direct, quiet look that had composure in it, and underneath the composure, something warm and certain and unperformed. He said, "How was it?" She said, "Good, really good." Emma said, "Dad, nudibranch. Are you listening?" He looked at his daughter. He looked at the woman by the door. He looked at the ordinary wreckage of a Saturday evening in a house that was his, that was theirs, in the way things become yours when you let people into them. "I'm listening," he said. And Emma told him everything, and Victoria sat down on the couch and took off her sand-covered shoes and listened too, and the evening came down slow and warm outside, and the house held all of them, and that was enough. That was in every way that mattered more than enough.